Today, we have various sources of information concerning horrible living conditions for the urban poor in Victorian times, though we often neglect reports about those living in the Victorian English countryside during the middle of the 19th century. Did you know that over half the people living in England and Wales at this time lived in rural locations? During this period in the English countryside, landlords owned much of the rural areas, with the aristocracy being major landholders. In recent times, the landed aristocracy are still estimated to own approximately 1/3 of all British land. Therefore, facing challenges with land ownership, shelter, and food, how did working class Victorians survive in the English countryside? Housing in the mid-Victorian countryside and rural areas for the working classes. In mid-19th century Victorian England, working classes were estimated to be the vast majority of citizens. However, unlike the urban poor, rural Victorian working classes are assumed by many people today to have lived a much better lifestyle. We have visions of small, well-kept cottages and open spaces outdoors which led to an idyllic rural Victorian lifestyle, though we would be wrong to have such illusions, because reality was far different for many rural Victorians. The hierarchy of rural Victorian English life during the middle of the 19th century meant that landed aristocracy and wealthy landowners had the best lifestyles. The rural social class underneath them consisted of independent farmers who possessed small holdings of land, usually less than 10 acres. It was a hard life despite owning their land, and oftentimes they were stretched due to limited financial resources. Therefore, as farming modernized, they were either squeezed out, sold on to larger farms, or became tenant farmers. Below this class were the tenant farmers. They rented property from landowners, paying back a portion of their earnings in annual rent for the privilege of working the land and basic management. Below this class in rural Victorian England were the majority of people, which were farm laborers. Their living conditions in many cases were described by numerous accounts as difficult at best. If they were fortunate to work for a wealthy estate on a full-time basis, a small cramped cottage in some state of disrepair consisting of 1 or 2 bedrooms would be provided as free lodging. These accommodations included leaking thatch roofs and decaying walls, since oftentimes the landlord put little effort into upkeep. Leaky window frames were stuffed with rags to keep out wind and damp. Sanitary conditions were horrific, and in numerous cases these dwellings were barely habitable. Many rural farm laborers were not in a steady employment position, which meant precarious work situations and a daily struggle for survival. Even when they found temporary employment after unrelenting inquiry, high rents charged for overcrowded lodgings meant little available for daily essentials. Again, like tenant farmers' homes, they were often poorly built, ill-equipped for decent living. These were not detached cottages. Many had dirt floors and were usually attached in a row. The few dingy small rooms on offer provided little shelter from torrid rains, damp winds, and accumulated filth indoors. Similar to their urban working-class counterparts, this led to overcrowding of large families inside cramped living quarters. In addition, with no land or capital, a typical farm laborer's family was usually placed in a constant cycle between rented lodgings, precarious accommodations, and possibly even workhouses. They faced further economic exploitation through low wages for long, hard hours of labor. While living inside these bleak homes, people faced even more challenges for daily survival. Their access to water was outside, shared by a number of other households. This not only presented issues for personal washing, cleaning clothes, and drinking, though keeping the house itself clean. Vermin were also present in numerous dwellings. Inadequate drainage within towns led to diseases such as cholera being a constant threat. Food in the mid-Victorian countryside and rural areas for the working classes. Surrounded by food, many rural working-class families earned barely enough to put nourishment on their own tables. After paying high rents to their landlords, sudden crop failures, poor market conditions for their crops, or cutthroat compensation, little to no money remained for household savings. Certainly, it was difficult just to provide for a household's bare necessities. Clothing was typically worn and threadbare, with children wearing items passed down from older family members. In areas where these laborers were paid in cash by their employers, white bread made from bolted wheat flour was the main staple. This would be supplemented by potatoes or vegetables at their evening meal, since meat was a luxury that could not be afforded. Those fortunate enough to have a small plot to grow vegetables could also own some chickens or a pig for slaughter. To begin their grueling day, a crude porridge of water, flour, and butter would be consumed. The midday meal usually consisted of bread and some cheese if available. There was a constant need to find nourishment as everyone in the household worked, including children. All the while, rural families would have to think about saving food for the winter, with preserves and root crops stored to help nourish them during that bitter season. Ironically, recent research found that working-class food in rural areas was the healthiest diet in mid-Victorian England. How did this happen? In various isolated rural poor areas, payment in kind for labor was often made using food. Whether through payment in kind or personal means, these locally sourced whole grains, root vegetables, fish, potatoes, and milk led to a nutritious diet. Consumption of these wholesome foods meant various rural areas experienced lower mortality rates and better health than the country as a whole. With factory output increasing as the Victorian-era Industrial Revolution progressed, tinned meats and inexpensive foods helped rural working-class families stretch their wages. However, as the high point of English farm and estate life continued to wane, the hard poverty of many rural people led them to industrial work in urban areas. This unstoppable change to traditional English rural life was due to complex issues like concentrated land ownership, industrialization of agriculture, and urbanization patterns. As a result, rural food production began to decline, with less quality food produced locally and available for countryside populations. Thank you for supporting us at VictoriantoModern. Please be sure to watch our next episode or one shown at the end of this video. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment. I wish you good tidings as we remember that sharing knowledge has been a noble deed throughout the ages.